My boss wrote me off as lazy, so I mastered my job without a word until she was the one begging for help. My name is Emily. And for the longest time, I was the quiet one in the office, the girl who kept her head down, worked hard, and rarely spoke up. To my boss, Sarah, that made me invisible, or worse, lazy. She dismissed me before she ever really knew me. I always thought hard work spoke louder than words, that if you kept your head down, showed up on time, and gave your best, eventually, people would see your value. I clung to that belief through school, through internships, and even when I finally landed what I thought was my dream job. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. And after years of struggling to pay rent and pick up odd jobs, I felt proud to finally belong somewhere that life has a way of testing your patience. My test came in the form of my boss, Meredith. Meredith was the kind of manager who always had something to prove. She liked to remind everyone that she had worked her way up from nothing, even though it was common knowledge that her father sat on the company's board. She walked around the office in expensive heels that clicked against the floor like a metronome of intimidation. Her voice carried across the cubicles, sharp and dismissive, and whenever she entered the room, you could feel the air tighten. I wanted to impress her. Everyone did. We thought if we stayed late, volunteered for projects, or sacrificed weekends, maybe, just maybe, she would finally acknowledge us. But Meredith didn't see effort. She saw people as tools, some useful, some disposable dot at first. I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I wasn't working as hard as I thought. Maybe my anxiety was making me paranoid. But the truth became undeniable the day she called me into her office. "Sit," she said, not even looking up from her computer. Her office smelled faintly of expensive perfume and overpriced coffee. I sat, trying not to fidget. "I've been observing your performance," she said finally, leaning back in her chair. Her lips curled into the faintest smile, the kind that told me she wasn't about to give me good news. And frankly, I'm not impressed. Her words hit me like a slap. I opened my mouth to ask what I could do differently, but she didn't give me the chance. "You seem lazy," she continued. "Unmotivated. I don't see leadership qualities. You're just coasting. If you want to succeed here, you'll need to do more than just the bare minimum." Lazy. The word echoed in my head like a siren. Lazy? Me? I stayed late almost every night. I helped coworkers meet their deadlines. I picked up shifts when others called in sick. My apartment was a mess, my social life non-existent. All because I was sacrificing everything for this job. But to Meredith, none of that mattered. I left her office numb, replaying her words over and over. Lazy. I wanted to cry, but I swallowed the lump in my throat. I wanted to scream, but instead I returned to my desk and kept typing, my fingers trembling on the keyboard. That night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about all the times I had been underestimated. In school, teachers assumed I wasn't trying because I was quiet. In college, professors overlooked me because I didn't raise my hand as often as others. And now, in the workplace, my boss had written me off as lazy without even seeing the truth. I realized then that I had a choice. I could give up, let her words crush me, and prove her right. Or I could prove her wrong without ever uttering. Single word in my defense dot, so I made a decision dot from that day forward. I stopped chasing Meredith's approval. Instead, I focused on mastering my role quietly, meticulously, until I knew every system, every process, and every loophole in the company better than anyone else. I turned into a sponge, absorbing knowledge from every corner of the office. I stayed late not just to finish work, but to learn. I read manuals, studied spreadsheets, experimented with software no one else bothered to understand. If Meredith wanted to think I was lazy, fine. Let her. because when the time came, she would have no choice but to see what I was capable of. The office was a battlefield, and I was preparing in silence. At first, no one noticed. My coworkers went about their routines, too busy with their own stress to pay attention. But slowly, things began to shift. One day, a coworker couldn't figure out why the new filing system kept crashing. I leaned over and showed him the workaround I'd discovered after hours of testing. He looked at me with wide eyes like I had performed magic. Another day, the team panicked because a deadline was looming and no one knew how to format the final report correctly. I quietly stepped in, finished it in half the time, and handed it back without asking for credit. People started whispering, not about how lazy I was, but about how much I knew. About how I always seemed to have the answers when no one else did. Meredith didn't notice at first. She was too busy preening in front of upper management, too focused on taking credit for the team's successes. But I noticed the change. I saw the way my coworkers started coming to me first before going to her. I saw how they lingered near my desk, asking for help with things they never would have thought to ask me before. It gave me strength. Quiet strength. Of course, Meredith eventually caught on. I'll never forget the first time she looked at me with something other than disdain. We were in a meeting, and one of the directors asked a question about the new project management software. Meredith fumbled, her confidence cracking for the briefest second. Before she could make a fool of herself, I spoke up, explaining the system clearly and concisely. The director nodded, impressed. Meredith smiled tightly, pretending my words were hers. But I saw the flicker in her eyes, the realization that maybe, just maybe, she had underestimated me. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I kept my face neutral, my voice calm. Inside, though, I felt a spark of vindication. It was only the beginning, because the more I learned, the more I realized how much power knowledge could give me. Meredith might control the titles and the promotions, but I was slowly building something stronger, influence, and influence I knew was the one thing she couldn't take from me. Still, I kept my head down. I wasn't ready to show my hand just yet, not until the perfect moment. For now, I let her think she was winning. I let her think I was still the lazy employee barely scraping by. But in the shadows, I was sharpening my skills, preparing for the day when the balance of power would shift. And deep down, I knew that day was coming sooner than Meredith could ever imagine. The next few days at the office felt heavier than usual. Karen, my boss, had already made her opinion of me clear: lazy, unmotivated, and unworthy of trust. Even though she never said it directly again, her attitude spoke louder than words. Every time I walked past her desk, I could feel her eyes on me, measuring, doubting, silently criticizing. But what Karen didn't know was that her cutting words had lit a fire under me. I was tired of being the quiet, overlooked employee. I was tired of people assuming that just because I wasn't loud or constantly showing off, I wasn't capable. The truth was, I was capable, more than capable, but I had allowed myself to fade into the background for too long. So I made a decision. I was going to learn everything about my job. Not just enough to get by, but enough to be untouchable. If Karen wanted to write me off, I'd give her a reason to regret ever underestimating me. At first, it wasn't easy. My role was data heavy, filled with reports, analysis, and systems that most people found boring. That was exactly why Karen thought I wasn't pulling my weight. She assumed I didn't care. But I started spending evenings at home digging deeper into the company's systems. I watched tutorials, read manuals that others never bothered to open, and took free online courses after hours. Every night, while my colleagues probably relaxed or binged Netflix, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, studying formulas, automation, tools, and shortcuts. I practiced until the complex spreadsheets that once intimidated me became second nature. Soon, I was not only doing the tasks faster, but finding ways to simplify them, ways nobody in the office had even considered. The change was invisible at first. I kept my head down during the day, quietly testing out my new methods, double-checking my work, and polishing my efficiency. I wasn't ready to reveal what I was capable of not yet. I wanted it to be undeniable, to hit Karen so hard that she'd be left speechless. Meanwhile, Karen kept piling on the pressure. She'd make sly comments during meetings like, "Some of us need to step up more than others." Her eyes would always flick to me, making it clear who she was targeting. One afternoon, she handed me a thick folder of reports and said, "I don't know if you can handle this, but give it a try. And don't be surprised if I need someone else to fix your mistakes." I smiled politely and nodded. But inside, I was boiling. That night, instead of sulking, I worked late into the evening, dissecting every page of those reports. I didn't just finish them, I corrected errors from her own past work and created a system that would prevent those errors from happening again. The next morning, I slid the folder back onto her desk. "It's done," I said simply. Karen raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. She skimmed through it quickly, her lips pressed tight. I could see the confusion flicker across her face when she realized everything was not only accurate, but improved. For a brief second, our eyes met, and she gave a tight, reluctant nod. No words of praise, no thank you. Just that stiff acknowledgement before she shoved the folder aside, but that was enough for me. It was proof I was on the right track. Over the next few weeks, my quiet transformation continued. I started to anticipate problems before they even landed on my desk. I automated repetitive tasks that used to take hours. Reports that my colleagues dreaded became my playground. And though Karen tried to pretend she didn't notice, I caught her staring sometimes when I finished something far ahead of schedule or when she realized I'd spotted an issue before it became a disaster. Still, she refused to give me credit. She'd hand out praise to others in meetings, highlight their minor contributions, and then breeze past mine as if I were invisible. It stung. I won't lie. There were moments when I wanted to throw in the towel, moments when I wondered if all my late-night efforts were even worth it. But then I'd remind myself, this wasn't about her validation anymore. This was about me proving to myself that I was better than the lazy label she had slapped on me. One Friday, everything shifted. Karen had promised the senior managers a detailed financial breakdown for a big upcoming project. It was a high-stakes report, the kind that could make or break trust in her leadership. She had been working on it for weeks, or at least she said she had. But when Friday morning rolled around, I overheard her in a panic on the phone, whispering about missing data and incomplete sections. By noon, she stormed into the office, frazzled and snapping at everyone. Finally, she dropped a half-finished file on my desk. "Fix this. No, I need it by 4 p.m. sharp." My first instinct was anger. After weeks of treating me like I was useless, she was now dumping her mess onto me at the last minute. But instead of arguing, I just nodded. I opened the file and almost laughed. It was a disaster. Inconsistent figures, broken formulas, missing information. If Karen had presented this to the managers, she would have been torn apart. I took a deep breath and got to work. The next 3 hours flew by in a blur of concentration. I pulled data from hidden company archives, corrected the flawed numbers, and rebuilt the structure of the entire report. By 3:45, not only had I finished, but I had also created a visual dashboard that made the complex figures easy to understand at a glance. When Karen came back, I handed her the polished version. She looked at me like I had just handed her a lifeline. She didn't say thank you, not directly, but I saw the relief flood her face. She took the file, straightened her blazer, and rushed into her meeting with the managers. I went back to my desk. and continued working quietly, but I couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. For the first time, Karen needed me. She relied on me to save her reputation, even though she would never admit it out loud. When she returned an hour later, she didn't look at me, but I overheard her bragging to a colleague about how smoothly the meeting went. She even claimed she had stayed up late perfecting the report herself. That stung, but I didn't let it break me. Because deep down, I knew the truth. Karen had just crossed the line from doubting me to depending on me, and that was only the beginning. I never thought I'd see the day when walking into the office actually made me feel confident instead of defeated. Every morning, I arrived earlier than most, coffee in hand, a quiet determination driving me forward. While others dragged themselves in barely awake, I was already knee-deep in tasks, solving problems before they even landed on my desk. It wasn't about proving Sarah wrong anymore. It was about proving something to myself. I began handling projects with a precision that surprised even me. At first, my colleagues didn't notice, but slowly, small changes became impossible to ignore. Reports were not just finished, but polished. Deadlines were met early. Clients left feedback that included my name, praising the clarity and execution of work. And yet, I stayed quiet. I didn't parade my progress. Instead, I let the results speak. Sarah, though, wasn't oblivious. At first, she dismissed my improvements with a casual shrug, telling others I had finally figured out the basics. But as weeks turned into months, she couldn't ignore the fact that I wasn't just catching up, I was excelling. One afternoon, I was working on a particularly complex project that involved coordinating across 3 different departments. Sarah had tried to take the lead, but she fumbled with the details. Meetings ended with confusion and deadlines slipped, so I stepped in. Quietly at first, answering questions when no one else could, offering suggestions during brainstorming sessions, smoothing out conflicts with calm solutions. Before long, people started coming directly to me. Hey, could you explain this part of the project again? Can you help me figure out how Sarah wanted this structured? The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah, the one who called me lazy, was now becoming a background figure while I became the person others trusted. But Sarah didn't handle that shift gracefully. I noticed her watching me with a mixture of suspicion and irritation, as though every step forward I took was somehow a personal attack on her. She tried to undercut me in subtle ways, miscrediting my work in team emails, taking credit for my suggestions in meetings. But it didn't stick because the truth was too visible. One moment, though, changed everything. A senior executive from headquarters flew in for a quarterly review. Sarah had been boasting for weeks about how she would impress them with her leadership. She prepared flashy slides, long-winded explanations, and rehearsed her speech like it was a Broadway performance. But when the day came, her presentation collapsed under scrutiny. She stumbled over key figures, couldn't answer questions, and her slides looked more like fluff than substance. Then the executive turned to me. You've been handling most of the coordination on this project, right? Why don't you walk us through the details? The room went silent. Sarah froze, her face pale, eyes darting like a cornered animal. All eyes shifted toward me. My heart pounded, but I stood, walked to the front, and began speaking. Calm, clear, confident, I broke down the project in simple terms, answered every question, and backed up every point with solid data. The executive nodded, even smiled. By the time I finished, the entire room knew who had really carried the weight of the project. Sarah sat stiff, her smile forced, hands clenched beneath the table, and for the first time since she called me lazy, I realized something I didn't need to shout to prove her wrong. My work had already done it, but that moment was only the beginning. Because the more I rose, the more desperate Sarah became to hold me down. And her desperation would eventually lead her to make a mistake, so big, it would expose her far worse than she ever exposed me. Sarah didn't take humiliation well. After the quarterly review, whispers spread quickly. People no longer looked to her for guidance, they looked to me. She could still sign off on things and throw around her title, but the authority behind it had thinned, and she knew it at first. She tried to regain ground with charm. She'd hover around my desk, pretending to check in, only to nitpick the smallest details. She scheduled pointless meetings where she repeated things I had already solved. She even started showing up earlier than usual, as though she could beat me at my own routine, but the cracks showed. Clients still asked for me, teammates still deferred to me, and every time she watched it happen, her smile grew tighter. Then came the sabotage. It started small, a lost file here, a misplaced email there. Once, a crucial document mysteriously went missing from the shared drive the night before a deadline. Luckily, I had backed it up. Another time, she sent out an email to the entire team blaming me for an error in scheduling. But when the timestamps revealed she had signed off on the mistake, the room went uncomfortably quiet, and her explanation stumbled. Still, I said nothing. I didn't call her out or retaliate. I just kept working, quiet, steady, relentless. But Sarah's patience ran thinner than mine. One Friday afternoon, as the office buzzed with the weekend mood, Sarah asked me into her office. She closed the door, leaned back in her chair, and folded her arms. "You're getting too comfortable," she said flatly. "I know what you're doing," I blinked. "Doing my job?" She scoffed, undermining me, making me look incompetent. "I don't have to do that," I replied calmly. "Your actions speak for themselves." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Her eyes narrowed, and I could almost see the calculation in her mind. She wasn't going to step back, she was going to double down, and she did. The following week, I was called into HR. Sarah had filed a formal complaint against me, claiming I was insubordinate, disrespectful, and creating a toxic work environment. I sat across from the HR manager, stunned, as they read through the allegations. Words twisted, half-truths painted as malicious intent, and outright lies woven with just enough plausibility to make me look guilty. But Sarah made one fatal mistake. She underestimated how many people had been watching all along. When HR interviewed the team, not a single person backed her claims. Instead, they defended me. Some even provided examples of her attempts to sabotage me. Clients had emails praising my professionalism. My records showed deadlines met, projects delivered, mistakes corrected. By the end of the investigation, Sarah's complaint wasn't just dismissed, it had backfired spectacularly. The HR manager called me back into the office, their tone completely different. "We've concluded our review. It appears Sarah's claims were unfounded. In fact, her behavior raises concerns about professionalism." I left that room with my head high, but Sarah wasn't so lucky. She walked out of HR later that day, her face pale, eyes wild, her once confident stride broken. The office atmosphere shifted after that. People avoided her, whispers trailing behind her every step. She had tried to destroy me, and instead, she had exposed herself, but what I didn't realize was that her downfall was only beginning. And the final blow, the one that would strip her of the power she clung to so desperately, was already in motion. Sarah didn't take humiliation well. After the quarterly review, whispers spread quickly. People no longer looked to her for guidance, they looked to me. She could still sign off on things and throw around her title, but the authority behind it had thinned, and she knew it at first. She tried to regain ground with charm. She'd hover around my desk, pretending to check in, only to nitpick the smallest details. She scheduled pointless meetings where she repeated things I had already solved. She even started showing up earlier than usual, as though she could beat me at my own routine, but the cracks showed. Clients still asked for me. Teammates still deferred to me. And every time she watched it happen, her smile grew tighter. Then came the sabotage dot. It started small, a lost file here, a misplaced email there. Once, a crucial document mysteriously went missing from the shared drive the night before a deadline. Luckily, I had backed it up. Another time, she sent out an email to the entire team blaming me for an error in scheduling. But when the timestamps revealed she had signed off on the mistake, the room went uncomfortably quiet, and her explanation stumbled out still. I said nothing. I didn't call her out or retaliate. I just kept working. Quiet, steady, relentless, but Sarah's patience ran thinner than mine. One Friday afternoon, as the office buzzed with the weekend mood, Sarah asked me into her office. She closed the door, leaned back in her chair, and folded her arms. "You're getting too comfortable," she said flatly. "I know what you're doing." I blinked. "Doing my job?" She scoffed. "Undermining me, making me look incompetent?" "I don't have to do that," I replied calmly. "Your actions speak for themselves." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Her eyes narrowed, and I could almost see the calculation in her mind. She wasn't going to step back. She was going to double down, and she did. The following week, I was called into HR. Sarah had filed a formal complaint against me, claiming I was insubordinate, disrespectful, and creating a toxic work environment. I sat across from the HR manager, stunned, as they read through the allegations. Words twisted, half-truths painted as malicious intent, and outright lies woven with just enough plausibility to make me look guilty. But Sarah made one fatal mistake. She underestimated how many people had been watching all along. When HR interviewed the team, not a single person backed her claims. Instead, they defended me. Some even provided examples of her attempts to sabotage me. Clients had emails praising my professionalism. My records showed deadlines met, projects delivered, mistakes corrected. By the end of the investigation, Sarah's complaint wasn't just dismissed, it had backfired spectacularly. The HR manager called me back into the office, their tone completely different. "We've concluded our review. It appears Sarah's claims were unfounded. In fact, her behavior raises concerns about professionalism." I left that room with my head high, but Sarah wasn't so lucky. She walked out of HR later that day, her face pale, eyes wild, her once confident stride broken. The office atmosphere shifted after that. People avoided her, whispers trailing behind her every step. She had tried to destroy me, and instead, she had exposed herself. But what I didn't realize was that her downfall was only beginning. And the final blow, the one that would strip her of the power she clung to so desperately, was already in motion.